In this tutorial, we want to print a triangle. Now, let us look at how this can be done. The triangle has a defined number of rows, a number of spaces around it, and a number of stars or asterisks that make up the triangle. This gives us three things to consider if we want to print out the triangle pattern using asterisks or stars. Now, we will use a variable called row to control the number of rows of the triangle. We will use another variable called space to control the number of white space found around a triangle, particularly those printed before the stars. We will use a variable called star to print the stars or asterisks. Now, this will lead us to define three loops. Let's dive in to find out how to write this in Java. So, what we are going to do now is to analyze how each of these variables will control the loops. The first variable I want us to look at is the row variable. The row variable defines the number of rows in the triangle. It doesn't print space or stars, oh no, it only ensures that the cursor is moved to the next row after all spaces and stars are printed. It iterates for n times, where n is the number of rows passed to the method. So, let us look at the second variable here. That is also called space. Now, the space variable defines the number of spaces printed before stars on a particular row. The first row, for instance, has n-1 spaces before a star is printed. That is, if the number of rows of the triangle is say 6, the first row has 6 minus 1, that is 5 spaces printed. So the second row will also have 4 spaces. The third row will have 3 spaces. The fourth row will have 2 spaces. The fifth will have 1 space, and the sixth row will have no space. So the number of spaces for a particular row is entirely printed before the stars on that row are printed. Now, this means the loop for the space variable will run completely for each value of the row variable. The last variable we will talk about is what I call the star variable. Now, the star variable prints the stars or asterisks that form the triangle. If you observe the triangle very well, now you will realize that the first row has 1 star, the second row has 3 stars, third row has 5 stars, fourth row has 7 stars, in that order. So the sequence of numbers, that is 1, 3, 5, 7, and so forth, form a set of odd numbers. Any number of the form 2n, where n is greater than or equal to 1, is an even number. Now, to get an odd number when given an even number is just you either subtract 1 from it or you add 1 to it. For example, now if you are given the number say 2, which is even, if you subtract 1 from 2, you get 1, which is odd. Or if you add 1 to 2, you get 3, which is also odd. So you see, these are odd numbers. Therefore, an odd number is of the form 2n plus 1, where n is greater than or equal to 0. Or an odd number is also of the form 2n minus 1, where n is greater than or equal to 1. Now, either of these formulas can be used to control the star loop to ensure the number of stars printed are of numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. Note this: spaces printed after the stars on the same row are irrelevant once the spaces printed before the stars are taken care of. Let us look at how this behaves in a true program. We are creating a program, and I'm calling the program geometry. So this is the code stub that we have to use to develop our program here. And this is the main method. I'm going to define another method, and this method is going to print the triangle that we're talking about here. So I'm going to call this method triangle. And the triangle will take a variable n. N is the number of rows, as we know. And as we did say, a triangle has got rows. It has also got some spaces, as well as the stars or the asterisks that are printed here. What I'm going to do here is that I'm going to declare a for loop here, and the first for loop is going to take care of the number of rows that we're talking about here. So and I'm declaring a variable called row. I will initialize it to 0, and row iterates when row is less than the number of rows passed with. And then after every iteration, it's going to increase by 1. Yeah, so if you look at what we have here, this for loop takes care of the number of rows that we have. So what it does is that the for loop will, this first for loop, which I call the outer for loop, is going to take care of the number of rows that we have in the triangle. That is, after every iteration of either spaces and stars, this for loop will move the cursor to the next row. Now after this, I will also define another loop, another for loop. And if you look at the shape of the triangle, spaces are first printed before the stars are printed, and this for loop is going to take care of the number of spaces that we have here. So I'm declaring another variable, as we said, called space, and with the space I'm going to initialize it to n-1. And this will iterate when space is when space is greater than here, because I'm starting with a higher quantity, row. And after every iteration, space is going to reduce by 1. Yeah, if you look at the shape of the triangle, we saw that spaces were printed before the stars, and here I am starting space from n-1. For example, if the number 6 is passed to this, we will have 6 minus 1, that is 5 spaces. And if you look at the shape, we said that if you pass, say, 6 to it, that is, if you want 6 rows in the triangle, then you can see that the number of spaces that are printed on the first row will be 5. So it is 5 because we have 6 minus 5, so that will give the 5 spaces that we have over there. So after the 5 spaces that precede the star on the first row, this update expression will be reducing the value of the space by 1. So from 5, the next iteration we are going to have 4. So we have 5 is greater than, here we have 0 here, and of course 5 is greater than 0. So that means that we will have 5 iterations here. So the next one we have 4 is greater than 0, then 3 is greater than 0, 2 is greater than 0, and of course 1 is greater than 0. So it's going to iterate when 5 is greater than 0 up to 1 greater than 0. So this is what we're going to have here. And of course, as you have already guessed, this for loop is going to print the spaces that we have there. So sorry, system.out.print, and we're going to have spaces here. Okay, so that is essentially what it is doing here. So here, print space, and let me also talk about this for loop. And this for loop is takes care of the number of rows here. All right, so that is the second for loop, or the first inner for loop. So that is going to take care of the spaces, and after this there is another loop that has to take care of the printing of the stars itself. So the last thing here, or the third loop that we're going to have, is the loop that will take care of the stars themselves. And I'm going to define another for loop here, and this time around I'm calling this variable star because it's going to print the stars here, and that will start from 0 to, and star will iterate when it is less than 2 times row plus 1. Okay, so we're gonna have this here, and after every iteration star is going to increase by 1. Alright, so that is where we have the stars printed. And let me type in the stars. So that is what we have it over here, and let me add a small comment to it. So print star here. So this loop takes care of prints stars, or let me say the number of stars. Okay, and this, okay, sorry, this loop actually takes care of the number of spaces, and this takes care of the number of rows. Okay, so let us try to understand the third loop here. From our first analysis, or our initial analysis, we said that, when we looked at the triangle, we saw that the first row had 1 star, the second row had 3 stars, the third row had 5 stars, the fourth row had 7 stars, the fifth had 9, and so forth. And we established that the numbers that we have, that is 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, are all odd numbers. So if you pretty much remember, we said to print these stars, we have to use a general formula that is used to print odd numbers, and that is 2n plus 1 or 2n minus 1. So in this case, we are using the 2n plus 1. So here we have 2, and the n here is the row, plus 1. Now we are using row here, and you don't see n literally here, because the n that we pass to this n is the number of rows. That is the number of, the total rows here. For example, if we had passed 6 to it, n would be 6 here. But here we are saying that the number of stars printed on each row is defined by the row that we are. For example, ROW, that is the row variable, initially will hold the value 0, and that will be the first row. So the first row, it will hold the value 0. So if you put 0 here, you are going to have 2 times 0, and that is 0, and 0 plus 1 is 1. So that means that 1 star will be printed on the first row. So as the number of rows, or as the value of the row changes, the number of stars also changes. So when we get to the second row, where the value of the row is going to be 1, of course we are going to have 2 times 1, which is 2, plus 1, which is 3. And we did say that on the second row we have 3 stars. So what this formula is doing here is that it is ensuring that we have odd number of stars printed along the rows. So we said the printing of the spaces here is controlled by the row variable, because we did say that on the first row we have, for example, if you pass the number 6 to the method, on the first row we are going to have n minus 1 spaces. That is, we are going to have 6 minus 5, or 5 spaces. So on the second row we will have 4, 3. So the number of spaces printed is actually defined by the row that we are. So the value of the row variable here, and that is why you can see that the row kind of serves as a leash on the number of spaces that we can print per row. So that is actually what is happening over here, and when we try this method, it is going to work. The last thing we will look at here is that if you look at the first loop here, it takes care of the number of rows, and the second loop takes care of the number of spaces that are printed. The third loop takes care of the number of stars that are printed. So if you look at these, we have been using the print method here. So after every print, the cursor is going to be left on the same line. So after the first execution, the cursor will be left on the same line. So here we will have spaces printed, the cursor will be on the same line, then we have stars also printed. But after that, we want the cursor to move to the next line. Of course, the first for loop controls the number of rows. So we now get into the first for loop. That is the second for loop, and there is the third for loop. So when we come here, we will be in the first for loop, and here what we want to do is to print system dot print line. We will not pass any arguments to it, so it will not print anything but go to the next line. So I'll say move to the next line. So that is what is happening here. So that is the method that we have defined here, but we have not called the method. Now to let this work, we have to call the method in the main method. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to define a variable and I'm calling it rows. So let me pass the number 6 to it. So initialize rows to 6. So let us assume that here we've passed the number 6 to it, and we want to print, you know, a triangle with 6 rows here. So what we're gonna do is to call the method. So I'm gonna call the method and I'll pass rows to it. So call the method. I'm calling the method here, and I want to see what is going to be printed here. Okay, now let us check what happens here. Okay, so that's how the triangle is printed. We can make some changes in the program here, and one of the things that we can change here is the formula 2 times row plus n. If you remember what we said about the general formula for, you know, printing odd numbers, we said that that can either be 2n plus 1 or 2n minus 1 here. So we can change this plus to minus here, and if we change it to minus, the first iteration is going to be, you have the row will be 0, so you have 2 times 0, 0 minus 1, and that is going to be -1. But we don't want this to be -1, and to do that, that means we have to change the value of the row 2 to 1, so that here will still be 1, because odd numbers we want to start from 1 here. But when we change the row also to 1, then that means we need to add equal sign to this, so that we have less than or equal to. Is very much important, because we want to print the number of rows that is passed to the method. For example, if 6 is passed to the method and, you know, we start from 1, that means we have bypassed the index 0. So if we want to account for that, then we have to, you know, bring is less than or equal to, not just less than here. So wherever, you know, we see the row variable, we have to also modify it, and we also see it in the second loop here. We see greater than, so here too we say greater than or equal to, and that will make it pretty much simple for us here. So we can also use this, and, you know, we are going to get the same thing here. Let me try the program here to run Java application, and of course we will see the same thing here. We see 1 star, 3 stars, 5, and so forth. I mean, we can take this even further and make some changes to this. And one other way that we can also do this is to change the for loop. We can take off the for loop and bring a while loop. So I have this while, and, you know, when we use the while loop, we have to also define or declare a variable to control the while loop. So I'm going to declare a variable called star here, and star is going to start from 0 here. So we have this. So that is the while loop control variable. So while star is less than two times row plus 1, I want you to print the stars here. So you print a star here. Now let me check this. If you look at what we have over here, you can see that the star will start to iterate when star is less than this, but here row has been initialized to 1. So during the first iteration, we are going to have 2 times 1, which is 2 plus 1, 3, but we want it to start from 1, not 3. So we have to change the row value to 0, and of course we have to take care of this, so that we have the iteration taking place from 0 to you know, the number that is passed to, that is the number of rows that we want to have over there. In the same vein, we have to take care of the equal to here. so that we have this. So we can use the while loop to print this, and that is going to give us essentially the same thing here. But don't forget, after the printing, we have to move from one line to the other. So here we are going to have the first loop is this, and within the first loop we have the for loop, and we have the while loop also here. But there is one more thing that we have not taken care of here. We began the while loop with an initialization, that is a control variable, and right after this we have to update the while loop so that it doesn't turn into an infinite loop. So we're going to say star plus plus. Okay, so increase star by 1 after every iteration. So that is what is happening here, and this method of course is going to move the cursor from one line to the other. So that is what we see here. Okay, and there is one more thing here. Star will start from 0, and during the first iteration star is going to be 0 is less than 2 times 0 plus 1, that is 1. So 0 is less than 1 is 1, so it's going to print 1 star here, and the value of star is going to increase here by 1 and go to 2 here. So 2 is less than 1, 2 is not true, and because 2 is not less than 1, it's not gonna iterate. So now it will now get back to the first loop, and during the second iteration here the value of star is now going to be 1 because it has increased here during the first iteration. But one thing is that what I want to do here is that after every iteration for a row, I want the value of star to be reset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place star equals 0 here. So, and I'll write reset the value of star to 0. So that is to make sure that after every iteration the value of star will be reset to 0 before it goes to the next line, so that after the printing of the first star, when it gets to the next line, the value of star is resetted to 0 to make sure that you have the prescribed number of stars printed on the row, because if it is not that, then the value of the star will keep on to increase and it will take you to the next line, and that is going to cause disruption in the number of stars printed in subsequent lines. So let us try this. Okay, so we have the same program here and we have the same answers here too. Now we can still make some modifications here as we did in the for loop. You can change this to minus if you want, and when you do that, you have to also change the row number to 1, and you bring an equal sign here to make sure that during the iterations it's going to happen here, and where you see the greater sign to, you add equal to, because during the first iteration you are going to have star is less than 2 times the row, and of course if it is 1 it's going to be 2 times 1, 2 minus 1, and that is going to be 1, so 0 is less than 1. And if you do not change the value of the row, it's going to be 2 times 0 minus 1, and that will be negative 1. So you have to take care of these things, and when you change it to the method 2n plus 1, or if you use the formula 2n minus 1, you are obviously going to get the same thing here. Let us try it and see, and you can see that we're getting the same thing here. One more thing, you can also we have used the inequality relational operators here, and what I'm seeing here too is that the inequality allows us to have some range of values, and one other thing that we can also be looking at is the not equal to sign. I'm talking about this sign. Yes, because why I'm saying this is that every value or each value is equal to only itself. For example, if you take the number 2, the number 2 is equal to 2 only. It is not equal to any number. So if I want to use this to do some iterations, for example, let me get back to the plus here, and if I get back to the plus, then I have to change something. So here I have to change this to 0, and then I have to take care of this equal sign also here so that it becomes just greater than. Now if you look at this here, during the first iteration we are going to have 2 times 0, that is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1, and of course star will be 0 here, so 0 is not equal to 1 is true, so that means that 1 star will be printed. But when it gets to, when it increases to 1, that is when this statement executes, star is gonna be 1, and when we have 1 is not equal to 1, that is false, so it will stop executing. So that means that on the first row you have only 1 star printed. Now when it moves to the second row, we are going to have star resetted to 0, and the value of row is now going to be 1. So during the first iteration we are going to have 0 is not equal to 2 times 1 plus 1, yes, that is our 3. So we are going to have 0 is not equal to 3, and that is true. And when it increases to 2, we are going to have 2 is not equal to 3, that is also true. And then so we will have 0 is not equal to 3, then we have 1 is not equal to 3, then we have 2 is not equal to 3. So 0 is not equal to 3 is true, so that means we have 1 star printed on the second row. Then 1 is not equal to 3, 2 is true, we have another star printed on the second row. Then we also have 2 is not equal to 3, so we have the third star printed on the second row. But when it gets to 3 is not equal to 3, that is not true, so the loop will break down here. So on the second row, that means that we are going to have 3 stars printed if you have that. In the same vein, when it gets to the third row, the value of row is going to be 2. The value of row was 0 on the first row, 1 on the second row, and 2 on the third row. So on the third row, the value of row is going to be 2, so we are going to have 2 times 2, 4 plus 1, and that is going to be 5. So when we begin iteration here too, mind you, the value of star will be resetted to 0 here, so we are going to have 0 is not equal to 5, that is true. 1 is not equal to 5, that is true. 2 is not equal to 5, that is true. 3 is not equal to 5, that is true. And 4 is not equal to 5, that is true. But 5 is not equal to 5 is false, so it will break down here. So by the time it breaks down at 5 is not equal to 5, we would have had 5 print there. The print method has been evoked 5 times, because from 0 to 4 we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that is 4 the gate over here. So we can as well use the not equal to sign if we do not want to use the inequality sign, and we could have as well used the greater than if we had exchanged these values, so that is also possible. So let us try this here and see. Yes, so we get the same thing over here. So you can now see that the possibilities are endless. It depends on your own imagination. That is how you want these things printed. So you just have to look at it, and you do what you have to do here. Now one thing is that if you look at our triangle, we can see that the first row we have 1 star, the second row we have 3 stars instead of 2 stars. Now if you want the number of rows to be printed numerically, that is in order, then what you can do is that you can change this formula for the odd number. You can change it and increment it just by 1, so we can have something like if it is less than, then you pick just row here, and because row here is 0, we have to say it is less than or equal to row here, so that during the first iteration we are going to have 1 printed here, because 0 is less than or equal to 0 is going to work here. So let us also try this and see. And with this one, what we are going to see is that the stars printed here are not going to be 1, 3, they are going to be 1, 2, 3, because here we are incrementing 1 by 1. We are not using the odd number formula. So it depends on the number of stars you even want in your triangle. Then you can try that and see. So if you look at the triangle that we have here, we have 1 here, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars. It goes in that order because here we are increasing the number of stars 1 by 1, because we are iterating from star equals 0, and we are looking at the value of the row variable here one after the other. So you can see this. Initially we had used
the formula 2n plus 1 or 2n minus 1, which defines the set of odd numbers. So that kind of allows us to print those odd number of stars on each rows. Alright, so that is that. Thank you.